because the Comex and other exchanges like it treat gold as fungible, meaning that one person's ounce can become another person's ounce, and because in order to maintain, if you will, trust in the system, the only gold available to write contracts against or buy contracts against on Comex is so-called good delivery gold, which is to say gold that has been refined at a certified assay lab and contains agreed upon physical characteristics. When gold is delivered outside of the good delivery system, that is, when somebody takes delivery at their home, not into a bonded warehouse, gold is called out of system. And if you want to re-enter that gold into the system, very often there's a slight discount to compensate the taker for the risk that the bar might be counterfeit, and to accommodate the inspection of the bar, including assaying. So good delivery gold is simply gold that has come into the system, has been tested, and has been verified, where the exchange itself takes secondary responsibility for the liability associated with fraud or counterfeited inventory.
Okay. So who stores the gold at Comex? Where is it stored, and who stores it?
Gold for Comex settlement. I mean, the Comex itself has inventory. The Comex primary dealers have inventory, but gold which is held in member accounts or sometimes client accounts in good delivery facilities around the world can be accommodated in the Comex system, much like in the LBMA system. So there are various licensed and trusted repositories around the world, and those inventories can be counted as good delivery for Comex-related contracts. Mm-hmm. The amount of gold that actually settles on the Comex relative to the amount of contracts which are outstanding on the Comex are astonishingly small, as you might expect in what's in effect a leveraged long derivatives exchange.
Yeah. So is there a precedent? You mentioned that if a group of people decided to kind of make a run for the gold on the Comex and request delivery, is there a precedent for that happening? Has that ever happened before?
Well, the Hunts tried to corner the silver market in the 70s. And what happened is that the Hunts got control of the forward contract. And it was pretty obvious that they were going to squeeze the shorts, including the institutions that in effect owned the exchange. And the consequence of that was that the exchange changed the rules. The Hunts were leveraged long on margin, and the exchange decided, rather than to insist on cash settlement, to make silver contracts non-marginable, which is to say they gave the Hunts the largest margin call in human history. One would expect that if there actually was an imbalance between calls on physical and the physical available, that the exchange would declare some form of force majeure and go to cash settlement. The exchange itself deciding probably what the appropriate level of cash would be. The sort of dream of the people who believe that the gold price should be higher would be that the gold price would resettle dramatically upward in the case of a failure to deliver, meaning that a short squeeze left to its own devices without cash settlement around an arbitrary sum would be much higher than the cash that would occur as a consequence of a negotiated cash settlement. I can't comment on that, but it is an interesting circumstance to contemplate. If you think about the amount of outstanding contracts relative to the collateral for settlement, there would be left to their own devices the opportunity for an absolutely epic short squeeze.
Right.
I don't believe that's going to happen myself, because I don't believe that the members of the exchange, who are often short, would allow a circumstance to come about that would result in the bankruptcy of the exchange or the exchange's members. That's not the way oligopolists act.
Right. Makes sense. So I guess you mentioned before, I think warrants and being a part of paper gold is in, if you have the Comex system and you request a delivery. So how can you actually get your gold out of Comex if that was to occur?
Right now, it's not any particular problem. You hold the contract till expiration, and you request physical delivery. You have to pay for physical delivery. If you're a big trader, physical delivery is often from someone else's pallet at the Comex to your pallet.
Yeah.
They move gold from one stack to a different stack. But
Right.
certainly, at Sprott, as an example, when we have major inflows into our physical product, we frequently have to buy 20, 30, 40, $50 million worth of gold a day. And it may be that although we need gold at the Royal Canadian Mint in Canada, that gold is resident in Chicago or New York or London. And so you have to take possession of that gold at the depository that it's at and arrange for transport, good delivery transport, to where it is that you need it. If you do it a lot, like we do, it's not a really complicated process. If you're a normal, living, breathing human being, it's let's just say that you're better off, rolling the contract or liquidating the contract and taking the cash. Certainly, there are repositories, Brinks included, available to living, breathing human beings, where should you hold a contract to maturity and want physical delivery in system, you can do it. But that's a very, very rare event.
Okay, great. So one more thing on the Comex. There was an article recently on Reuters, March 24th, and it said basically the London Bullion Market Association and several major banks that trade gold have asked U.S. exchange operator CME Group, which we discussed is operating Comex, to allow gold bars in London to be used to settle its contracts to ease disruption to trading. So what did you make of that? Is that basically LBMA bailing out Comex? Is that
No, not at all. This is just a circumstance where the London market has been adequately supplied, and the U.S. market hasn't been adequately supplied. It's often the same dealers, the same buyers and sellers in both markets, and we need to move inventory from where it exists in ample supply to where it doesn't exist. One of the things that's been happening for really quite some time has been that there has been disintermediation in gold, which means basically a transfer in hands of gold from 400-ounce London good delivery products. Those products have been bought by private Swiss refiners and re-refined into 25-gram and 100-gram retail products.
right?
And this has been a very prominent trade. In the last 8 weeks, as a consequence of the COVID virus, these Swiss refiners have been shut down, which means that the wholesale inventory, the 400-ounce inventory that London has dealt in, has experienced a temporary hiatus in its traditional purchaser. And the consequence of that is that while the U.S. markets were under inventoried with regards to institutional product, the London market was full, for want of a better phrase, because one of their most important traditional markets, the Swiss refiners, ran out of refining capacity as a consequence of being, shut down for social distancing. That's created impacts around the world. because the demand for retail gold and silver products, small denomination products, has been very strong at the same time that the industry's ability to fabricate it has been very weak. And
Right.
so you're seeing a circumstance which I've never seen in my life before, where retail physical dealers are paying customers a premium to spot rather than a discount from spot to buy the more popular retail products so that they can resell it for even larger premiums.
Yeah.
I've never seen this before, but it makes perfect sense in a market where demand spikes and supply is suddenly non-existent, for there to be a dichotomy in price between the wholesale market, which is pretty well supplied, and the retail market, which is empty inventory.